Okay, so my assumption is that you have just finished watching Inside Job and you're coming back to the lecture after watching it. Are your minds totally blown about what took place there? These people knew what they were doing and they crashed the economy. They ruined people's lives and laid people off like my wife. Holy crap. And now, here we are again in another economic crisis. What are we gonna do? It's serious, right? There's a ton of people who have lost their jobs. They're without work, and there's no relief in sight at the moment. And so we take a look at how that has affected business. Some businesses have gone on. My wife and I are fortunate where we've got a major client and another business that we started that is in the healthcare industry, so we're doing okay, right? There are other consultants who are completely hustling, right? I know someone who is a PR consultant and, you know, they're nervous right now, right? They have a few clients and things are going okay, but that could change in a heartbeat, okay? And then I know folks who aren't working. They've lost a job. They don't have any work. My kids go to a Catholic school and the amount of families that are back for this year have drastically decreased because they can't afford tuition because they're not working. Wanted to share with you a graph that I recently pulled off of Twitter, and it really does kind of put into context what we're looking at with regard to the pandemic we're in right now and how it's affecting people. So this is the percent of losses in post-World War II recession. So anything happening, after, let's get that notification off there, after World War II, any recessions that took place. And you can see the biggest one on the chart, up until recently, is here in the purple. This is the this is the 2007 recession employment figures, right? The giant dip right in here, the number of months after the peak employment, right? So this is in 2007, right? Oh my God, look where we are today. I mean, I saw this graph and having lived through and worked through, you know, my kids were, geez, in 07, I had one kid who was 3 and my son had just been born when we were, my son had been born a couple years after 07. So we were in the middle of the recovery period right around here when my son was born. It was scary times. It was scary times, one income. And yet, having gotten through that for us, for our family, we lost a lot during that time frame. You know, it took us quite a bit to recover from that because we were a 2-income family. And now we look at where we are here in this employment recession due to COVID-19. And it's just shocking to look at. And so when we talk about economics and we talk about the economy, and the economy, to be very clear, doesn't have anything to do with the stock market. The economy is how money is moving everywhere, not just on Wall Street, but how it's getting to consumers. And typically it gets to consumers because they're employees first, right? Well, if they're not getting paid as employees, they can't turn around and spend that money for things like groceries, retail, internet connection, lights, gas, heat, electricity, phone. We can't go to the movies because, I mean, up until till a week ago, the movies weren't open, right? So no one's going out to eat in the numbers that we used to be able to go out and eat. So the restaurant industry is just, suffering. There's so much being impacted by COVID-19. And this chart is a dramatic reminder of exactly what that looks like. Okay. So if you're not shocked by the documentary, maybe that graph, that little image there has shocked you a little bit? One of my greatest, I don't know, things that give me a little bit of happiness, a chuckle, is seeing your reaction to different things. Because I know when I was in high school, I didn't give two flying what's about the economy. I didn't care. But because of things like the recession and the housing crisis in 2006, 2007, because of things like COVID-19, you guys are getting exposed to a lot of terms and a lot of events that I didn't get exposed to as a kid. My kids are going through it too, and talking about it and seeing it through their eyes, seeing it through my students' eyes, is something that is always interesting to me. It's one of the many reasons why I like to teach. So as we go through this chapter, now you have even more grounding in some of the terms that we're using and how it actually plays out, quote unquote, in real life, or IRL, as we say in text, right? Okay. My daughter would have cringed if I had done that in front of her. Okay, let's take a look at the rest of our PowerPoint as we go through chapter 2. Now that you have a little bit more of a foundation around some of the terms that we'll be using and discussing. Okay, here we go. So we talked about this before, you guys. There's the questions that you had to answer. Shoot me a text or a message through Canvas. I want to know the answer to the third question. The other two you may see on the exam. But the third question, I want to hear from you. I want to see what you found in your research. Give me 1 or 2 sentences. How did the recession affect San Diego? If you want, you can also talk about how COVID-19 is affecting San Diego. But feel free to send that to me through Canvas instant messaging or through text, okay? All right, let's move on. So we learned in the documentary Inside Job about the TARP program, or Troubled Assets Relief Program, okay? In October of 2008, Congress passed a $700 billion Troubled Assets Relief Program. By the end of the year, the U.S. Treasury had spent half of that money investing in all places, investing in banks. The Treasury also spent a portion of the money in a partial bailout of the automotive industry. Now, fiscal strategies are closely tied to political philosophy. That's something else that was illustrated very clearly in the documentary, right? Regardless of politics, though, most economists agree that lower taxes can boost the economy by leaving more money in people's pockets for them to spend and invest. Most economists say that the lowering of taxes can help in economic growth because people will have more money to spend. Okay? Now, we probably, you all have not talked about something called the debt ceiling. But you may have heard of, maybe from an adult in your life, or just in the news, or in other classes, something called the deficit. The deficit is the amount of money that we as a country have spent outside of what we have given ourselves as a budget. And the big thing is that over the last 3 or 4 years with this current presidential administration, they have spent so much, and the deficit has increased. Now, under the previous administration, the deficit was still substantial, about $500 billion. But let's take a look at something different with regard to the deficit. There is a great U.S. National Debt Clock Real Time. This is a great website. You can look at it on your own. I do this every year with my classes. Let's take a look at where we're at. And there it is, right here in red on the left-hand side, U.S. national debt. It was at $500 billion. We are now at, let's take a look. here's million, here's billion, 26 trillion. 5 trillion in US federal spending. It's running away. And the big thing is that you guys are gonna have to fix it, because I'm gonna be dead before this thing's fixed. It's terrible. And so when we talk about how politics doesn't really play too much into the economy, but fiscal policy does, and it is fiscal policy that allowed for the deficit to increase in this administration. In the previous administration, they had managed a way to spend and to decrease the deficit in this country. The administration prior to that was the opposite. They had the deficit run away again. So fiscal policy is essentially government policy on how we're going to spend our money, what kind of budget we're going to give ourselves, how that money is going to be distributed amongst all the various parts of the country, whether it's military spending, whether it's through aid to folks in need in this country or abroad. That's fiscal policy. That's what we're looking at in monetary policy, how we're going to spend that money. Okay. All right. Again, if you want to take a look at this on your own, here's the code, the URL, usdebtclock.org. It's just totally embarrassing to look at now, but here we are. Okay, let's go back to the good old chapter 2 slide. Okay. All right. Fiscal cliff is the across-the-board spending cuts and sharp tax hikes to decrease the U.S. budget deficit. I imagine, as we are in an election year, if there is a change in administration, in other words, if current president doesn't get reelected, and we see, I guess it's what, Biden and Harris, if they get elected into office, you're going to see a difference in how they're going to spend and how they're going to allocate funding. And you'll see, hopefully, we'll see them attack the deficit in a way that will decrease it. Ultimately, it's going to take, because it's so high, it's going to take several presidential administrations, and I mean several. We're talking a good 16, 20, 24 years of disciplined spending and disciplined policy for them to do anything to help correct that. And I could be naively optimistic that it could be that quick. It's probably going to be a lot longer, but we'll see. It's something to look at. Among other things that are interesting about politics is how that affects things such as our deficit. Okay. So when we talk about budgeting, every year the government must create a budget or a financial plan that outlines expected revenue from taxes and fees and expected spending. The debt has grown every year since 1957. And the pace of growth will likely increase further in the wake of the current economic crisis we're in. Because let's face it, who knows how quickly we're going to get a vaccine for COVID-19, right? It's hard to believe anything in the news today about what's happening with a vaccine. It could take 2 months. You know, by the end of this year is what some experts say, that we could get our first test of a vaccine, right? Our first true distribution to the population at large. It could take longer. We just don't know, right? So we have to keep in mind that as this economic crisis continues to lag and drag out, it's going to have a big impact on our federal debt. So the core purpose of the Federal Reserve, also known as the Fed, is to influence the size of the money supply or the total amount of the money within the overall economy. Okay. The most common definition of money supply are M1 and M2. And by mid-2011, the M1 money supply totaled about $3.18 trillion. and the M2 version of the money supply totaled about $12.7 trillion. Interest rates are related to the amount of money. If there is more money, interest rates fall. This encourages businesses to grow and consumers to spend. But if there is less money, interest rates tend to increase. And this will, in turn, reduce spending and check inflation. Now, the Fed mostly uses open market operations. Treasury bonds, notes, and bills are the IOUs the government issues to finance its deficit spending. Open market operations are regulated by the Federal Open Market Committee. If the Fed decreases the discount rate, it becomes easier for banks to take out loans at lower costs. So think about it. The discount rate gives banks more leeway to feel good about taking loans out, and interest rates as a whole, if they're down, right, that makes it even more advantageous to take out a loan, right? This also reduces the rates on bank loans, stimulating the economy as people are more likely to borrow and spend as well. So if the banks are getting money from the Fed at a cheaper rate, they in turn can offer it to consumers at a cheaper rate, right? And some of the things that consumers get loans for are what? You all are either have just gotten your license or about to get your license, so car loans, okay? If you're just married, you want to buy a house, so mortgages, right? So these are things that people are likely to borrow money for. Some of you in here might borrow money to start a business, right? So if these rates are lowered for the banks to access money, they in turn can lower the rates for individual consumers to access that money as well. This will stimulate the economy as people are more likely to borrow money and spend it as well. The reserve retirement benefits that these depositors want to borrow money without notice. And currently the reserve requirement, depending on the size and type of the bank's deposit, is 10%. All that means is that they have to have a certain amount of their own money available in order to access additional funds, okay? All right. So our economic system is capitalism. We are a capitalist society. Although we're more in line, everyone likes to say we're a capitalist society, okay? But we're more in line with not just capitalism. Everyone's least favorite word, well, not everyone's, those who are conservative hate that word, socialism, right? But we have so many socialistic programs in this country. Think about it. How do roads get paved in this country, and sidewalks created and repaired, and traffic lights installed? It's based on our tax money. This is a socialist program. Highways get built based on all of us essentially crowdsourcing it through our tax money, right? Police officers, fire departments, these are socialist programs. Social Security, the very name itself is social in it, right? Payments to those who are retirement age and older, okay? It's a social program. So while we all like to say and talk proudly that we're capitalists, right? It is more of a hybrid system, both a mix of capitalism and socialism. All right, so over time and around the globe, nations have instituted different economic systems, but a careful analysis suggests that no system is perfect, and we know that to be true also, which may explain why there isn't one standard approach. One core capitalist principle is the paramount importance of individuals' innovation and hard work. In such a system, individuals, businesses, or nonprofit organizations privately own the vast majority of enterprises. These private sector businesses have complete autonomy in their decisions, and individuals are free to choose what they will buy, how much they're willing to pay, and where they will work. It's that right of free choice, okay? In the free enterprise system, companies must value or offer value to their customers. The degree of competition varies between industries. A pure competition ensures that a sole producer does not control the entire marketplace's price. In monopolistic competitions, producers have some control over the prices of their products, but it depends on the value that they're offering their customers. Breaking into a market characterized by an oligopoly can be tough because it typically requires a huge upfront investment. Finally, monopolies tend to harm economies, and that's why most monopolies have been made illegal under acts such as the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 and the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914. All right, so supply and demand. The more demand, means the more your product is wanted. The more there is supply, the demand might go down because everyone can get it whenever they want it, okay? So the concept of supply and demand explains how the dynamic interaction between buyers and sellers directly affects the range of products and prices in a free market. It's important to remember that supply and demand do not operate in a vacuum, okay? They are directly related to each other, right? So is there a huge demand for my favorite candy bar, Three Musketeers or Sweet Tarts? Sweet Tarts, not a candy bar, but my favorite candy. Two of my favorite candies, Three Musketeers and Sweet Tarts. Those are the ones I raid my kids' Halloween bags when they come back, right? Is there a huge demand for them? No. As a matter of fact, there's not a demand for them. If I walked into any CVS, Rite Aid, Vons, Walmart, Target, I could probably get my hands on a Three Musketeer bar or a roll of Sweet Tarts like that, right? A couple bucks. I'm chowing down on some really awful sugar and calories, right? These are items of convenience, meaning I can get them whenever I need them. Now, we saw with the pandemic how supply and demand works. What was the one single thing that we couldn't find, oddly enough, in March in any store anywhere? And I'll give you a hint, it wasn't surgical masks. It's the one thing we use every day when we go into the restroom, right? It was toilet paper. It was gone. There was nowhere to be found. Can't explain it, but suddenly the supply and maybe perhaps the fear of being locked in our homes for an extended period of time without knowing when we'll be able to get out and go back to work and go out to stores and whatnot, it absolutely increased the demand for toilet paper. And the thing was, with shutdowns, nationwide shutdowns, manufacturing shutdowns, producer shutdowns, right? Lumberyard shutdowns. We get toilet paper from paper product, from pulp, from wood. It's melted down and turned into pulp, right? And then processed into paper. All those places began to shut down, and so the supply started to dwindle because no one was producing the materials needed to make more. So we saw supply and demand in real time in March of 2020, okay? And so we know for a fact, just with that example alone, that they do not operate in a vacuum. They are directly related to each other. Then it's the constant interaction between these two forces that helps determine the market price in any given category. Toilet paper is more expensive. Have we noticed this? Right? You know what else is more expensive? Hand sanitizer, right? And it's not because the ingredients to make hand sanitizer have increased. It's the containers that are so scarce. It's the materials to build the containers that has helped increase the price. Okay? So in theory, market prices adjust toward the point where the supply curve and the demand curve intersect. As we see here. Ooh, pizza. It's almost dinner time when I'm making this, so pizza sounds good. All right. So in planned economies, the government controls the economy. Socialism and communism are two different types of planned economies. In a socialist economy, although the official government goal is to run the key enterprises that directly affect public welfare enterprises in the best interest of the overall public, inefficiencies and corruption often interfere with effectiveness. Karl Marx introduced communism in his book, The Communist Manifesto. Countries that adopted communism, North Korea still has it, not Soviet Union anymore, but Russia, still kind of communist, right? Cuba, right? And then in the past, the Soviet Union, back in the day, Vietnam, they did not thrive, right? As a matter of fact, the Soviet Union is no longer a union. They're now just individual countries. Pure economies, market or planned, will not be able to fulfill all the needs of the citizens. This is one reason why most economies and most countries are opting for mixed economies. Pardon me. So most countries have a mixed economy, much like the US does, right? Even the US does not have a pure market economy. The various departments of government own a number of enterprises, such as the Postal Service. This is a service that the government runs for the benefit of its people. Schools. Our education system is a socialist system in nature, right? It is for the good of all people. In the last 30 years, the majority of economies have opted for privatization. The price of economic restructuring is very high and proves to be a hurdle for our nations undergoing marketing reforms. Take a look at the US prison system. This used to be a system run by the government, but now it's been largely privatized. Private companies have begun running prisons. Not begun, it's been going on for a while now. Okay. All domestic production is included in gross domestic product, or GDP, even when the producer is foreign owned. While calculating GDP, illegal activities and legal goods that are not reported to avoid taxation are not taken into consideration. One of those illegal activities that's recently in some states become legalized. Legalize it. What are we talking about? That's right. Marijuana. Cannabis, right? It's become legal here in California and in Colorado. I guarantee you, people are making a lot of money in it. Canada has already legalized it as a country. The US is not far behind. You will see within the next 4 to 8 years, if not less, legalization will be a national issue. It will be a new industry in this economy, and it will be taxed relatively high. And those taxes will be used to help, among other things, our school systems, and to help offset some of that deficit we saw earlier, hopefully. The level of unemployment contributes to an economy's economic health. When people have jobs, they have money to spend and invest. This in turn will contribute to the company's economic growth. Frictional unemployment tends to be ultimately positive. Structural employment, on the other hand, is usually long-term. This category encompasses people who don't have jobs because the economy no longer needs their skills. So we take a look at things like cyclical unemployment, layoffs during recessions, for example. Cyclical, there's also seasonal unemployment, right? Or seasonal employment. Retail stores play a huge role in seasonal employment, particularly, traditionally, perhaps not this year with COVID-19, but traditionally, you see a ton of retail outlets hire additional folks during the holiday season to handle that holiday rush, right? We would see sometime in the beginning of November, places like Target, Walmart, Amazon, retail stores, Forever 21, Sephora, I don't know, Macy's, Nordstrom's, they would actually hire additional employees, probably beginning earlier than November 1st, probably even in October, to gear up for the biggest shopping day of the year, right? Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. And they will sustain those employees all the way through until January. Seasonal employment. This summer, what are some of the seasonal employment things that happen in the summer? All the beach areas, right? We've got lifeguards. They hire additional lifeguard crew come the summertime. More people swimming in the ocean, right? So there's plenty of different areas, different industries where we see seasonal employment happen. All right. So when we talk about economic performance through the business cycle, we talk about a cycle that does not have a predictable pattern. The phases of the cycle are different each and every time it happens. And no one can actually predict the changes. For example, no one could predict that there was some sort of weird investment vehicle out there that we learned about in the documentary Inside Job, right? And an investment vehicle that was betting on people defaulting on their mortgages, right? So there was no way for us to predict that, us as normal employers and normal consumers in the economy, right? Only a few people had inside knowledge of what was going on. Similarly, we could not have predicted COVID-19. We can try to prepare for a pandemic, right? A lot of folks worked hard to prepare for something like this. Well, there's no way we can predict when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and whether or not the response is going to be a good one, okay? In the contraction phase, or the contraction phase, businesses cut back on production and consumers shift their buying patterns to more basic products and fewer luxuries. In the recovery phase, businesses begin to expand, consumers start to regain confidence, and spending begins to rise. The expansion phase observes businesses expanding to capitalize on emerging opportunities, and customers are optimistic and confident. This fuels purchasing, which consequently feeds into production and in turn encourages further hiring. The rate of price changes is also a factor that is used to measure the economic well-being of a country. A low level of inflation is a sign of a healthy economy. If inflation rises beyond control, it becomes hyperinflation, okay? The United States was going through a phase of disinflation in the mid-1990s and in the second half of 2008. The deflation is a sign of economic trouble and is usually accompanied by rising unemployment. Sometimes changes in the producer price index, or the PPI, can predict the changes in the consumer price index, CPI. And because producers tend to pass on fluctuations in the price to consumers within a month or two of changes. Most firms aim at producing more goods and services by using fewer hours and other inputs. If productivity is high, then the GDP grows. The advent of new technologies has helped the US achieve good productivity. We should remember, though, that high productivity doesn't necessarily indicate good quality. All right, so here we have our key terms for the chapter. I hope you guys watch the documentary. If you haven't, you better. There's an essay question on the exam. You should watch it. Okay, so definitely check it out. It really helps you grasp what is being talked about in what would otherwise be a dry chapter, right? A boring chapter. This is real life stuff that happens, and it has a trickle-down effect on you and me when things take place in the economy, okay? All right, this is the end of chapter 2, our lecture. I hope you're finding these things useful. Please shoot me a text, shoot me an email through the Canvas system, not my regular email. I don't check that as often, okay? Or shoot me a text. Again, you can hit me up on Snapchat or Twitter or Instagram. I'm on the gram. And you can message me that way as well. I really want to see if these are helping you guys grasp some of the terms and the concepts that we're talking about in the chapter. I can't see you, so it's hard to tell. I can usually tell when I'm in class, things are being taken in a good way. So text me, let me know, and we'll see what we can do to continue these lectures if you guys are finding them useful. I hope you're having a great week. Smile, breathe, enjoy life, and we'll be talking soon. Take care.